Morning everyone, thank you for attending today's webinar. We'll be discussing wheat streak mosaic virus with Brenda Coots from the South Perth office. Thank you, Brenda.
Thanks, Dominique. So just as a first up summary, wheat streak mosaic virus infects all different cereal crop types, as well as many of our annual grasses that we have in the wheat belt. It's spread by the wheat curl mite, and it's also seed-borne. Why this virus is important is because when plants are infected early, especially wheat, and this early infection is pre-flowering, we get yield losses of up to 80%. Whereas if we have late infection in wheat, so this is after grain set, there's very little impact on yield from this virus infection. This virus has been proving to be quite widespread across the central and northern ag regions this year, and we've had detections in Minginoo, Malawa, Coolin and Condinin. So some of the common factors that we've been finding in relation to where we've had these reports of infected crops is that the wheat streak and mosaic virus infected crops are often adjacent to paddocks that had quite extensive volunteer wheat that had been maintained normally for stock feed, and these crops were adjacent to these emerging crops. And what we've been suggesting for management, if the crops have been infected early this season, is to spray out those areas that have been infected, and this avoids harvesting infected seed and also reduces the chance of infected seed being left in the field for next season. And because of what we're seeing this year, next year we also need to be quite vigilant in if there is maintaining of volunteer wheat for things such as feed, then we're suggesting maybe a 20-metre border spray to limit the spread from the volunteer wheat into the neighbouring crop. Some of the symptoms that you might see with wheat streak mosaic virus infected wheat plants is that you'll see bright yellow streaking on the leaves. And this streaking will start at the leaf tips and extend down the length of the leaf, and the plants are often quite spindly in their growth as well. And the streaks that you'll see can be quite continuous, or they can be broken streaks as well, and this depends on the variety of wheat that's been infected. So as I mentioned previously, all cereal types are potential hosts of wheat streak mosaic virus, including wheat, barley, oats, millet and rye, and a number of annual grasses. Barley grass in particular is a host. We've found those plants infected at quite high levels. Ryegrass, brome grass and also wild oats can be hosts of the virus as well, and this is how it survives between growing seasons. So the vector is the wheat curl mite, as we've mentioned before, and it is transmitted by seed as well. Early infection, we have 80% yield losses, and that yield loss is mostly due to the grain being quite shrivelled, as well as fewer grains being produced. And the shrivelled grain is often quite dark as well, and quite a lot smaller than the healthy grain as well. So the wheat curl mite itself, you won't be able to see this with the naked eye. They're very tiny. They don't have wings, so they can't fly as such, but they crawl between plants, or they get caught in wind currents when their populations build up too highly on a plant and the conditions are conducive. They'll stand up on the edge of a leaf and they get caught in the wind currents and be dispersed that way. The optimum temperature for population build-ups between 22 to 27 degrees, so they love the warmer sort of climates as well. And once a mite feeds on an infected plant, it remains infected for the next 7 days. So when we're looking at a paddock that's infected with wheat streak mosaic virus, you'll often find infected plants in different sorts of arrangements, and one of those first situations can be where you'll have patches or gradients of infection that are often adjacent to a mixed pasture, and these mixed pastures include a lot of volunteer wheat, and the mites have moved from the volunteer wheat into the emerging crop. So that's why you'll see a gradient of infection into the crop. You may also see wheat streak being presented as scattered infected plants throughout a wheat crop, and this is normally the result of sowing infected seed. Or you might see uniform infection across a crop, and this is normally the situation where there has been the crop has emerged. This is prior to when the volunteer wheat or grasses that may have been in that paddock have been killed by the herbicide. And in this instance, the mites have moved directly from those infected volunteer plants or grasses onto the healthy plants. So what we know from this year is that there was quite a high risk scenario. So what we had in some of those areas that we found the virus in this year is that there was areas of high summer rainfall, and this provided a green bridge, so it allowed the build-up of volunteer cereals and native and annual grasses, and this allowed the mite vectors to build up in their populations and also aided the survival of the virus between growing seasons. Also in areas where there was early sowing of cereal crops, because of the soil moisture from this early summer or high summer rainfall, allowed the mites to build up over those warm temperatures and allowed them to move into those emerging wheat crops. What we do know as well is that wheat streak mosaic virus is found throughout the wheat belt, but it is normally at very low levels, and the levels that we've been finding haven't been damaging in the past. But this year, where we've seen the green bridge being maintained, such as for feed for stock, and the environmental conditions being warm conditions early in the season with those early sown crops, there is that carryover of the virus between the green bridge to the emerging crops, and this is often as a localised infection within a crop. And these levels have been quite damaging. So this is just showing you a sort of a disease risk cycle for wheat streak mosaic virus. So as we've mentioned before, if you have the high rainfall during late summer, early autumn, you get that green bridge developing, and that's where the wheat streak mosaic virus and also the mites will build up on. So when we have the scenario of maintaining that for stock feed, we have the mites moving from those infected plants into the crops, and we end up with the high risk scenario of early high levels of infection of wheat streak in those crops. The problem with this is if the seed is not harvested or there's seed screenings, these are often left in the field and they add to building back into the disease cycle. Whereas if we have if your choice is to maintain this volunteer wheat as stock feed, we're suggesting spraying out a border of about 20 metres of this mixed pasture that includes the volunteer wheat. And by doing this will reduce the movement of mites into the adjacent emerging crop, thereby reducing the risk of wheat streak into that crop. Our other management strategy for this virus is to actually spray out the green bridge 4 to 6 weeks before sowing, and in this instance, this will allow the volunteer plants to completely die off. Provides no food sources for the mites to build up on, so that those populations will decrease dramatically, and therefore you will end up with no food for the mites, no virus to spread, and you'll end up with no or minimal wheat streak. And this is the same scenario if you have a hot, dry summer and then no green bridge develops. You won't find a lot of wheat streak. So when we're looking at management for wheat streak mosaic virus, we have found in the past that the best thing is to make sure that there is no overlap between when we have the volunteer wheat and the grasses before the emerging crop. So this we're suggesting 4 to 6 weeks to allow those plants to completely die off so that the mite populations reduce and the virus levels reduce as well. Having the border spray if you're retaining those mixed pastures as another management strategy. Also, if you're sowing summer crops such as maize and sorghum, these are also hosts of wheat streak mosaic virus and could be allow a potential build-up of the virus that could move into emerging wheat crops during the season. Also, there's also the potential to delay sowing. So as we mentioned before, mite populations are most active between 22 to 27 degrees. So in those cooler temperatures when the mites aren't building up and their populations are reducing, this is also another management strategy. So what to do if the crop is infected this season? Avoid retaining any of that seed, so you're not sowing infected seed next season, so you're not introducing a new source of wheat streak into new crops, and also spraying out areas of crops that may be highly infected this season so they don't actually form any seed that could possibly carry over into next season. What's worth noting is that insecticides are not at all useful in killing mites, so this isn't an option for management, and that all wheat cultivars are susceptible there are no wheat cultivars that have any level of tolerance or resistance to the virus. So thank you very much, and I hope that's provided information for you about wheat streak mosaic virus.